today is where I didn't want to bring executives together to just ruminate or to just regurgitate the stats around DEI&B and what was going on around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. What I wanted to do was create a substantive platform where leaders and decision makers could come together and really talk about what are the practical steps that we can take together and really move the needle forward around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So that is Diverse by Design. Within Diverse by Design, we can, through the apparatus of Priscolis, which is our parent organization, we are able to offer customized training, diversity, collaboration, and consultation and thought leadership all around diverse talent and strategies that companies can use in order to absorb diverse talent. With that said, for today's session, I would like for us to consider the mastermind principle. Now, the mastermind principle declares that this is the coordination of talent, effort, and time and energy, all by two or more people or two or more minds that are marching towards a singular goal together in the spirit of harmony and collaboration. The mastermind principle also declares that no two minds can ever come together in that fashion, moving towards one goal without creating an intangible and invisible force that's considered to be a third mind. That third mind is called the mastermind. And that is why we are here today. This is a masterminding session to ensure that we are able to really have impact around diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to diverse hiring. So today, what we're doing is pulling together a group of brilliant leaders who come from a vast array of experience through various industries, and they offer up a unique perspective. And they will help us create this environment that will help us create that third intangible and invisible force called a mastermind. And I'm excited about doing this session with you all today. Is that okay? Well, welcome. So now I got to get to my notes. So that was just me rambling. Now I got to really stay on track. So with that said, we have a special message from our Diverse by Design co-sponsor, ITSMF. We also have the lovely Elaine Norman with us today from ITSMF. But we also have a short video from Joanna Jones, who is the president and CEO of ITSMF. Let's check out the video.
Good afternoon. My name is Johanna Jones, and I am the president and CEO of Information Technology Senior Management Forum. ITSMF was founded 26 years ago by 14 Black technology C-level executives who looked around the room in their Fortune 500, 150 enterprises and said, why are we the only ones? We shouldn't be the only ones. And going forward, we won't be the only ones. And so they founded this organization with the mission of developing Black technology executives for the highest level of leadership in corporations to impact organizational innovation and growth, and truly developing leaders, mind, body, and soul. And so 26 years later, this organization has 3 academies: the Emerge, the Management, and the Executive Academy. We are a professional organization that has a global reach, and we are one of the few nonprofit organizations 100% dedicated to developing Black technology leaders for the C-suite. And so in 2016, when we had the opportunity to collaborate with Priscolis to develop Diverse by Design, that was such a powerful value proposition. The significance of being to diversify this technology pipeline from the entry level to mid-career to senior executive and the C-suite was critically important when Diverse by Design launched in 2016, and it is even more important now. We have a lot of work to do in diversity, equity, inclusion, in our corporate partners to really show true quantitative impact in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so now it is my great pleasure to express support for Diverse by Design and to renew our commitment to not only being a sponsor and to not only being represented on the board of Diverse by Design, but to roll up our sleeves and collaborate and to go after even more partners to ensure that we're not only represented, but that we are truly having an impact on innovation, on growth, and there is a sense of belonging for all technology leaders. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I look forward to working with our great partners at Perscolis to continue to build and expand and to grow Diverse by Design. Thank you.
So now I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our keynote speaker, and we're going to have a fireside chat. And I just want to give you a little background on Miss Nikki Lanier. So we're truly excited to have Nikki Lanier, who is the president and CEO at Harper Slade, which is a racial equity advisory firm. We are very fortunate to have Nikki with us here today, and in a few minutes you all will learn why. Nikki has many accomplishments. She is a lawyer and an attorney by trade, a corporate executive, a human resource leader, a previous Federal Reserve SVP, and a gubernatorial appointee cabinet secretary, as well as a published author, which we will learn more about today. Jeez, Nikki, you are good. Man, most importantly, you know, she has a long resume. She's very experienced, just a brilliant individual, but she is a human, humble individual who has a wealth of experience that she would like to share with us today. So please help me in welcoming Nikki Lanier. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikki. Really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here. This is exciting. I've been to Chicago in a while. I was here. I grew up here. I don't know if I shared that with anybody, but I was my father used to work at Governor State, and my mother was at. Oh, this is my thing ain't working. Oh, sure. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so my upbringing, everything about my life up until this point, what you're looking at is the 52-year-old version of Nikki, but everything about the lens through which I see the world, how I lead, how I practice in this work, how I parent, how I show up as a spouse, is absolutely informed by my upbringing. So I'm the only child born to two incredibly potent academics. Both of my parents are college professors, and they both were fairly violently involved in the civil rights movement.
Wow.
My mom less so than my dad. But growing up, that's what I heard so much about: consternation and strife and clawing their way to a sense of mattering and wanting to be a part of their home, their country, and be fully ingratiated, fully folding into the fullness of the American dream, and how elusive that is just for Black folk. And so that was what I heard my entire life. On top of that, I grew up, with the exception of the time that I was here in Chicago, for the most part on historically Black college campuses. My parents taught primarily, not exclusively, at HBCUs. Though I was in Chicago for a little bit of time, I regard myself as being from Hampton, Virginia. My parents taught, okay, ain't you? All right, my parents taught at Hampton. I grew up on Hampton's campus after elementary school, so middle school, high school, college. And so that's like all of this understanding about the rich tapestry of the Black experience is who I am, not just what I do. So that's all a part of how I think about this work.
Well, I love that. And you mentioned your grandmother and your parents and how they were trailblazers. What other lessons have you learned from them, and how else has that influenced you as you moved on through life?
I mean, for like most of us, right? When we think about, if we really spend time to think about, so what did we learn from our parents? Not the stuff and thing of it. It's more the belief system around who we are at our core, like the marrow of me. And so what I learned is how loud and noisy and thick and opaque narratives are. And particularly those narratives that are assigned to Black and Brown, not exclusively. I mean, women get the narrative, men get the narrative, veterans get the narrative, LGBT, right? So we all have a narrative that comes with our life, and it is inside of that narrative that we have to figure out how to exist. And I remember one of the things that my grandmothers would tell me. My company, by the way, is named in honor of both of my grandmothers. And both of them were just like super involved in what they called at their time Negro rights initiatives. But my grandmother, my mother's mother, grew up in Jim Crow South, so she had a very different kind of almost beleaguered view of the plight of Black people, even in the midst of trying to work with NAACP and Negro whites. But my father's mother was from Ohio, and this woman was 6'2" and just not having it, right? She was just, no. So, but my mother's mother was very much, you fight for your rights to a point, and you can speak up for yourself to a point. I remember just one quick story.
No, take it.
Listen, we're gonna be
I'm
here all
loving
day.
it.
I don't even know how much time we have. Okay, so one quick story. So I graduated from law school at the University of Miami. I passed the bar the first time I took it, and we had a family reunion like days after I got the word that I passed the bar. So I went to my grandmother's house, and I ran in the house to say, "Grandmama, I passed the bar, and I got a job with this law firm in South Florida." And she kind of, I just remember so vividly. She got up from her chair, very feeble-bodied old Black woman, if you could envision that, and she put both of her hands on my shoulders, and she said, "Don't go up there and upset any white folks." Right? So her orientation around and being empowered, even in the midst of being proud of me and excited for me, there was something in there that knew very clearly that whatever I am, I'm still subject to the narrative, and I'm still subject to that brand. And there's some level of fragility that still has to be a part of, in her view. Upsetting white people could literally get you killed. Still can, right? So anyway, so that was part of what I understood, and part of the kind of things that she told me, and that's the stuff that helps me in my work. And quite frankly, sometimes it diminishes my ability to be as forthright in my backbone as I'd like to think that I am.
And in what ways do you think it diminishes you, or do you have examples on what you ran into, like what challenges you ran into in that way?
Well, I would tell you, my whole career, I even practiced law, then I did a lot of HR, then worked for the Fed. I can't say that there's ever been an environment where I felt entirely welcome in. In fact, the more loud message was the message that I know was coming to the narrative of Nikki and not to the Nikki of Nikki. And so what I saw, things like, messages around, "Oh, Nikki, you're too intimidating." I'm gonna ask Black women up in here. By a show of hands, how many of you have been told you're intimidating in the workplace? Every last one of us, right? Having a point of view and having a Black mouth with it as a female is problematic in most corporate spaces, in spaces, period. So anyway, we get that feedback, and then you get you talk too much, you don't talk enough, or people don't like that you dress this way, or people don't understand what. So it's always kind of this, you're subject to someone else's perception of you in ways that you find that becomes the work, trying to figure out how to manage that versus the work of the work. So when I hear about that, and I remember experiencing so much of that, one employer in particular, it was just like, everything was, "Nikki, you're wrong. Nikki, you're not good enough. Nikki, your messages are too this. Nikki, you're coming off as this. Nikki, why do you have your law degree up and you're doing HR?" People don't like that. People don't like that you always wear suits to work and this is a casual. People don't like, so it's always, you're not fitting in. And to the point where it's now like a part of, I'm subject to discipline. So, and then that's the corporal punishment equivalent in the workplace, right? And so I'd always think about, dang, there's my grandma's message again. There's my grandma's message again. And so I'd be lying if I suggested that some of that didn't make me paranoid. Like, because sometimes people give me some feedback that I for daggone sure need to hear. And I'm like, wait, was that because I'm Black or because I actually do need to shut up? Right.
I go through that every
I don't
day.
know. What was
My
that? Right.
president's right there.
Right.
He can tell you that. He knows.
Right. So I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Like sometimes I feel like I overthink it a little bit because I'm just sensitive to it. But I also know that there's some truth in there.
Nikki, thank you for allowing me to go off script a little bit. It's just that you're really interesting, and I'm having a visceral response to some of the things you're saying. So this is really, really
Let's do
helpful.
it.
But you have an enormous amount of experience, 20 plus years in the private and public sector. How has that experience influenced your current understanding of racial inequity and disparities that still exist today?
So I had the opportunity to do a podcast with some of your team members earlier, and what I shared then is what I will share now, and that is because I've been such a student of work and how work works, and I understand that whatever it is a place that we all go to at some point in our lives, this thing called work. And that is true of most human beings, irrespective of where we live. And the workplace is tremendously powerful in that it can be the source of such joy and replenishment, but it could also be the source of diminution and muting and stunting that doesn't just contribute to the way that we work our work, but it contributes to how we feel about ourselves as human beings. So in my HR life, I was always really interested in employee engagement. You know, we all love employee engagement. HR folks can't get enough of it. But there are circumstances that give rise to really rich and meaningful employment engagement experiences. And some of those include like to what extent can we come to work with our dignity intact, leave work with our dignity intact? Do we feel as though we are affirmed and valued and appreciated because of who we are and not in spite of it? Yeah. How do we find progression in the workplace, progressive programs at work? Are we with an employer or with a manager who allows us to continue our education, who is in the business of sharpening our skills and developing us and finding ways for us to grow in our careers? Those kinds of things matter. And when they're in place, then you tend to be more interested in work, more connected to the workplace. You have a sense of safety and security, and now you become more engaged. And it is that engagement that we covet, but not for engagement's sake. We covet engagement because of what it activates. Engagement activates a discretionary effort and like all this great innovation, like you're like pouring into the workplace the best of all of your lived experiences. I sometimes am not quite sure how much of my lens, my Black female, 50-year-old something, mama, that kind of thing, how much of that is welcome into the conversation until I feel safe, right? But there's some circumstances that give rise to that safety. So when we are talking about like all of that I've learned in my career, it's the DEI, specifically racial equity work I do now, is really about how do humans engage toward one another? What recognition do we have about the default inertia that we all walk into? When we all came into this room, there was a narrative that came in with us, and there are definitions around that narrative that come in with us, and some of those narratives are more deficit rich than others, and that lends itself to an inertia, right? And so the DEI work fights within an inertia in every single environment. And part of why we want to push against that inertia, I mean, I got a whole litany of economic reasons why that is the case, from the federal macroeconomic policy, monetary policy theory kind of issues around that. But at the root of it is the engagement. Like, so what we say we want as employers, we work ourselves against by just not recognizing that the inertia in place in work almost always counteracts what we say we want, particularly for those that are coming in with these narratives. So, what'd you ask me?
You're answering everything. How has your experience impacted your understanding of racial equity and inclusion?
Okay.
Yeah, you're answering it beautifully, by the way.
That was pure happenstance. Okay.
So let's skip into the actual workplace.
Yeah.
So how has your experience helped you define or differentiate between what is racial equity and how do you distinguish between equity and equality in the workplace?
Okay, so I define racial equity as proportional fairness that takes into account the cultural and historic realities that have beset people of color as distinct from all other people and works to remedy the same. So there's three parts to this definition, the way that we define it in our work with Harper Slade. One is proportional fairness. So it's not fairness, it's proportional fairness. That is responding to what has happened to Black and brown people in this country but you got to know what happened before you can respond to it. Many of us don't. So that requires active effort to figure out what is your lived experience, by the way, right? What y'all do different on Friday nights that we don't do? What your Thanksgiving dinner look like? All of that, like the cultural nuances that are very different and largely accommodative. So Black and brown lived experiences almost have been built since 1619 in a way to try to accommodate how to carve out a life here. So what does that look like still even today? But it also remedies, right? So there's a remedial aspect. So I'm clear our definition freaks a lot of folks out because it feels affirmative action-y, it feels reparation-y, and it probably is. But what does that have to do with the workplace? So what we have been pursuing for years and years and years is equality, which is cool if we did it, right? And so it's almost like that ship has passed, sort of, just because of the urgency of the demography right now and what we're seeing with the economic realities that the Fed has studied en masse. I'm happy to share with any of you all any of the studies that have been recently promulgated over the last 2 years on the cost of inequity specific to race and racism. But there's like trillions of dollars that we have lost and continue to lose hourly because of the way that we have excluded Black and brown from the fulsome American dream. So there's that piece. So as I think about racial equity and why it has to be equity at this point and not equality is because I'm really interested in the heart condition. I'm really interested in the belief system humans have one to another. I'm interested at some point, but what you're doing in the name of equity or equality or DEI or what you're saying is not as compelling to me as who you're being, because your being shows up in the way you parent. It shows up in the way that you show up in community. It shows up in how I experience you or how other people experience you in Kroger. Or wait, y'all got Kroger here? Yeah, you do have, yeah, grocery store. Right. So it's oh, that's right. So it just like your being is very, very different, and that's what I'm super interested in. It's the harder work. It's the harder work, but it's the work that helps to reset finally how humans engage with one another in affirmation of our beauty and tapestry and not in spite of it. So in other words, I can see my white brothers and sisters and see value and potency in your beauty and in your value without trying to make you be me, trying to find a way for you to be familiar to me, trying to make, okay, well, do you eat collard greens? Do you eat this? Like, do y'all like to watch these kind of, like, you don't have to have all of that for me to see you as valuable. And yet we still, like, we're in this thing where we make people audition for value. Jesus. Right? Like as a whole human construct, you have to audition for value. So anyway, that's why equality doesn't really work for me anymore. We've never really been good at it. We don't know how to do it. And all that really is beating away the manifestation of the thing. So if you don't like Hispanic people, then equality says, well, here's what, even if you don't like them, here's what you can't do because you don't like them. So we beat away the doing of the thing and we never deal with, why don't you like Hispanic people? Like we're like, let's deal with that.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Something else I would love to hear from you about is, so Harper Slade actually helps organizations address racial inequalities. Could you explain or deepen or further explain your philosophy and how that has informed how you work with individuals and organizations to deepen their journey around addressing racial inequality?
Yep. Well, first it's inequity, so I don't really talk about equality that much. But to your point, what I do is try to help organizations cultivate environments for Black and brown talent to thrive. First, before we talk about recruiting strategies or before we talk about what programs, which policy statement's gonna be, I really wanna unpack, especially at the leadership level, what is already here culturally, what social norms are already here that are gonna thwart even the most sincere efforts to move DEI forward. It requires that employers recognize that most environments are already inhospitable for difference. And that's because the world is inhospitable to difference. So what I've said differently, when you think about the D, the E, the I, as a matter of course, we've never really included difference default Like, right? When I talk about you got to audition for it, like I matter contextually. I matter more because I got a law degree or because I work for the Fed or but it still is a Black, whatever. So the mattering becomes so consequential in terms of how we find our way toward just the human ritual of living. So I think for me, it's the pacing and sequencing of the work, like the D work and the I work and the E work. It is helping employers understand that whatever is already there, we all inherited this environment that requires almost this presumption of muting and a diminishment of difference, because that's all we've known since we've had to figure out how to navigate difference since the dawn of time in our country. That's all we've known is exclusion and those kinds of ideals. And so while we'd like to think that we're better, because everything about our doctrines say that we are, everything about the Constitution, everything about the Bill of Rights, everything about all of wonderful amendments and all of these laws, the voter rights and civil rights, all those things say we are who we in fact are not. And that is always true of every workplace. And I hate to say that, like, it's not to bemoan or besmirch any of you in your work, because I know that you're earnest and committed. You wouldn't be here otherwise, but you're still fighting inside of an organization. DEI exists inside of organizations designed to kill it. And that's just because you exist within the United States, and the United States doesn't understand difference as a matter of presumptive value. They just don't. We just don't. And being able to say that, that's what I talk to employers about, because they were like, girl, get on out of here. Like, it's so offensive. People get so mad at me, but I think we want to be able to say these words. We got to say it out loud, because it's hard to cure something that you can't even call out, right? If I'm in total denial that I have cancer, I'm never going to go to chemo.
Yeah.
So that's it.
I was about to give you an offering. Like, this is getting good. Jeez, Lord have mercy. But, so just allow me just to ask you this question, a little bit off script, but I am really interested in hearing your perspective on this. You talked about auditioning for value, which is powerful, and I've seen that before and been through it. What is the impact on the individual that has to audition for value? What have you seen? Like, have behaviors popped up from that? Or what is the negative impact of an individual that has to go through that experience?
Oh, well, I mean, I think we all know that there's nothing positive really that comes out of that. There's living a life of accommodating someone else's perception of you every single day and every single way is not just exhausting, but it is joy depleting. And I mean, it's just hard. It erodes, I think, your psychological well-being, your emotional well-being. It fragments families. It's just difficult. And in spite of that, many of us who live under the weight of these deficit-rich narratives that are just stuck to us, you're expected to perform and produce and be excellent and effervescent and never frown and never be upset and always be on.
Yeah.
And what I have found, especially in the environments where I have been my most depleted in ways that I knew was like based on not just the regular work depletion stuff, but just like the race stuff, it definitely impacted my marriage. Impact the way that I parent, my patience level, my, how much Prozac I'm sucking back. Really. So, I mean, there's a lot that we don't really understand about what the toll, especially the cumulative toll. And this is, by the way, not just specific to Black folks. It's just anybody who has just been in the place of, more often than not, and sometimes people don't even want to hear you say it, but you're battling against this narrative that's in this room with you. But there's this weight that has this cumulative effect, especially generationally. Yeah. If you think about, like, I don't know how many watch National Geographic and you see, I'm going to butcher this, but like animals that are born into the wild, you see that some animals like literally come out of their mother's womb immediately running, right? They don't know what the heck's going on, but it's something right. So they come out and they're just like, mama's running, so we running. That's passed on trauma. And I think many of us have that, especially descendants of slaves, have I don't know what the technical terms in our corpuscle, this something inside of our bodies, it is passed on this sense of trauma, and it is really, really hard. Last point on this, I mean, there's so many times where I have gone to work. I think I've posted something on this LinkedIn, but there's so many times I have gone to work on a Monday following like a public murder of fill in the blank. Philando Castile, Mike Brown, certainly George Floyd, Brown Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin.
Yep. No problem. So thank you so much for sharing that. Do we need a break? Okay. So isn't this conversation really, really good so far? I'm just really enjoying the conversation.
I was wondering how long it's going to fall apart, how long it's going to take before I just completely fell out this chair.
You had me at the
Anyway,
first
but let me finish my point. So I'm sorry. So yeah, so that what you just saw me do typically has no place in the workplace. Like, so Monday morning meetings, I'm in the meetings and staff meetings, and particularly with a lot of our leaders, and it's like, so what'd you do this weekend? What'd you do this weekend? And I went yachting, I went skating, I went, a dinner party, and I'm falling apart. In the midst of all of my blackness falling apart, and I'm worried, like, how did you guys not see that? Did you guys not know? Did you guys not, like, how? And so there's a piece of it that's like, how do you deal with your own feelings about it, and then deal with the fact that nobody really seems to care? It was like not even an issue that was worthy of coming up in larger environments. So two kind of daggers, if you will, and you still got to produce.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Nikki.
Thank you for making me cry.
Promise that wasn't my goal, but I just appreciate the transparency and having us walk through this. And just two more questions. When we think about businesses and how they probably need to reform or re-envision how they go about addressing racial inequality inside of their organization, how can these organizations begin to look through an equity lens when it comes to their own systems, processes, including recruitment, performance management, team collaboration, training and development? What are some of the best practices and strategies that you would share with us?
So for me, everything starts with like a belief system again. So I think it's important for employers to first presume that your systems and your policies and your structures, your culture probably does not contemplate cultivate the best environment for multiculturalism, for equity, certainly equality or equity. So what I'd love to see are companies that are willing to start this journey with interrogating every single one of their employee policies. So it's like, hey, HR, let's sit in a conference room and we're gonna go to start with one day, and we're gonna go through every part of our employee life cycle, how people come in, what happens while they're here, and how they exit. And I need to understand that from the lived experience of Black and brown people first. And the reason why I start there is because I got like the economic arguments around that and browning of the country, and there's economic implications around us not getting that right quicker. But then all of the other marginalized group, I'm going to assume as an employer that the experience that employees have is far more complex than I know. I'm going to assume that the employee engagement surveys that we've been promulgating for years that tell us something will never tell us what it's like to have a darker skin and that narrative and try to maneuver our workplace. I'm just going to assume that and interrogate our policies with that thought in mind, interrogate our programs and our cultures with that thought in mind, and ask questions. Solicit feedback, find ways to engage with companies like mine who do racial equity assessment audits. We call it the Racial Equity Index, right? But it is designed to help you understand what is the Black and brown lived experience here. But you can't get to that question if you're not willing to presume that, wow, is it different? Maybe it is different. Yeah. So I think that's like the first step. What we're used to doing in most corporate environments, because we're like super A type personalities and everybody's got a bias toward action. We try to figure out, what are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to hire? Where are we supposed to go? What do we need to throw up on the website, right? That's good. And even if you're sincere, it's not effectual It's not effectual in terms of changing the tide that now must be turned around in order for our country to thrive.
Thank you for that, Nikki. And last question. So what guidance would you give to ERGs and their allies as they continue this important work and try to really build momentum around change?
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have ERGs in your workplace, but I find them to be incredibly important if constructed and accessed and leveraged appropriately and resourced right. So employee resource groups, right? So I've come from environments most recently with the Federal Reserve, and I'm so proud of the work of the Fed after 2020. So I work for the St. Louis Bank, St. Louis Fed, and they had 3 branches, one in Louisville, one in Little Rock, one in Memphis. I ran the Louisville office. But in this time, the 7 years that I worked for the Fed, we had 2 glaring murders of Black people by police officers that the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis stepped back and said, okay, wait, hold on, we're missing something, and our employees are falling apart here, our Black employees in particular, and it's not showing up in our employee survey in the way that we understand it. So inside, of course, St. Louis, so you had Mike Brown, and then you had Breonna Taylor in that time frame. And so to their credit, they embarked on exactly what I just talked about, which is this racial equity assessment, racial equity index, and they were like, we really want to understand Black lived experience here first, not exclusively, but first. And in doing so, they invoked the ERG, the Black Employee ERG, to help assure that the questions that we're asking were right, that we're picking the right consultant, that we're orienting this and socializing this in a way that felt right and appropriate inside of the organization. Each of those ERG members, and I'm talking about, you have folks like an analyst this, specialist that, mid-level manager this, who were assigned now an advisor. Right, you become my coach. So I got a coach who's a specialist, who's a Black. We had a specialist in our IT department, was the Black lived experience coach to the president of our bank, the president of the Federal Reserve. Had this 17 layers down, weekly meeting with, so what am I missing with Black employees? Like, totally, tell me, where am I going wrong? That kind of visibility and vulnerability. But you have to have some level of credibility with your ERG to get to that point. And, ERGs go through their own maturation phase. And so I think it's important for them to really think about how do we do the best that we can in celebrating who we are and educating on who we are, and then advocating about when and where we need help and need to have greater visibility.
Nikki, I have to say that, number one, I'm humbled to be able to share this time with you. And on behalf of Proscolas, ITSMF, our primary partner, Tech Systems, we just thank you for bringing all of who you are here. You are a brilliant, masterful mind and a beautiful soul. Thank you. Let's give Miss Nikki Lanier a round of applause. I think I got more work to do without crying. I'm too tall to be crying, but let's try to figure this out. Okay. So thank you again for that, Nikki. That was phenomenal and very insightful. And it was very compelling and heartfelt insight that you shared with us. We really appreciate it. Next, I am thrilled to show the trailer for The Road Up, which was co-directed by Greg Jacobs, who is here with us today, and he'll be on our panel. But let's check out the trailer and then hear from Greg himself about the documentary, which follows 4 participants in CARA, based here in Chicago, where we're actually holding this wonderful event. So thank you, CARA, for having us today. But let's check out the video.
It's like, please check your firearms at this point.
Does it say that really?
I always cared at least a little bit about everything. And something just snapped in my head and I didn't give a shit about anything.
I'm interested in the customer service position.
Yeah, I made a mistake, but it's not gonna happen again. Maybe something else might happen, but not that one.
I need some work experience, so I'm willing to do just about anything, not too degrading, but I do something to get me back into the workforce.
Good morning. Good morning. What's the latest and the greatest?
I would never think to try a job training program. I know how to work.
Say I don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Say you don't want to go. Sit your ass down.
If you don't come here because you truly want to change your life, it's not going to work.
I am worthy of the best that life has to offer. I don't care how many mistakes I made.
It's hard. It's hard as hell. But if we know that, who in the hell want to do it by their damn self?
Anything that is worth obtaining takes hard work, and this is the work. I mean, I feel good about today. So, I don't know.
All we're doing is selling hope. I can't get you to the next step. I cannot feed that little glimmer of hope that got you to get up out the bed in the first place. Without hope, there's nothing.
Lift me up, lift me up, lift me up, lift me up.
Put your head back and say it again. I am worthy of the best that life has to offer.
I know you love me.
Please help me welcome Greg Jacobs to the front of the stage. Do we need to grab the other mic?
All right, and sit.
Listen, feel free to sing if you want.
I'm so well. That's actually a very real thing here.
I love it.
For morning motivations. It's so surreal seeing Jesse walk into this room while showing this in this room. I'm kind of disoriented at seeing that right here.
Well, thank you so much again, Greg, for being here with us today. Please first just let us all know, how can we access the video and what would be the best way for us to actually see it?
Oh, well, so first of all, my apologies, because I think there was a glitch in the link. So I know a lot of you have not been able to see the film. Those cards should have a link for you all, so you can watch it at your leisure. It's a secret that we usually don't tell people until the events that we're having these conversations, that we're going to leave. We always leave the link open for a week or so afterwards, because we know not everybody gets a chance to do the homework. So hopefully by the end of the day, you will feel an urge to go home and watch the film and watch it all the way through, because believe me, when you fully understand the story of Jesse, who you will be meeting soon, which comes through at the end, you will understand the payoff of that.
Thank you for that. And Greg, what was your motivation behind creating this documentary? Like, what was the driving force? What compelled you to do this video?
Well, so I always say sometimes we find our documentary topics and sometimes they find us. Yeah. And this was one that found us. It was actually a friend of ours, Amy Ostrander, who became the co-producer of the film. She was just there was like a dinner party or something, and she was talking to somebody who was a former colleague of hers. And he was saying, I've been involved for years in this organization called CARA, and I always thought it would make a great documentary. And she said, well, I happen to know a couple guys who do that, so maybe you should talk to them. So we ended up talking to Mark Carroll, who was the one who kind of came here as a Goldman Sachs executive on loan and helped start Clean Slate, the social enterprise that CARA runs. And so he introduced us to CARA, and we did what everybody does who's introduced to CARA. We came to Motivations. That was sort of the beginning. And Motivations, for those of you who don't know, takes place in this room. So their morning ritual where these chairs are arranged in a circle and they have announcements. And then they have people who are students or people who are graduates, alums, just staff, whatever, come up and respond to a prompt for that morning. And the prompt is usually something that is, personal and real and serious for 8:30 in the morning. They say things that are very emotional and very difficult and challenging. And then they do the most terrifying thing, which is they stop their story and then they start to sing. And that's the one requirement, is you have to start to sing. And the moment they start to sing, everybody then, the whole community sweeps in behind them and joins them and sings whatever that song is. And I call it a musical trust fall. And it is, by the time you are done, first of all, you're so pumped up that you're ready to face the day. But if you haven't experienced it before, you're just like, I'm in. This is an amazing place. And I am so excited by the work that they do. And I'm so excited by the potential of everything that's happening here that I want to tell this story. I want to be part of this story. And so as filmmakers, we got to become part of the story and then tell the story.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So You know, I was fortunate enough to see much more of the video. And in the video, Jesse had mentioned, you know, the students may forget what I teach them, but they'll never forget how I made them feel.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was important to capture in the documentary?
Well, I think, first of all, sort of on a mental level, that's our job as filmmakers as well. So we need to make people feel something, and that's something that we are dedicated to. Is that, you know, you want to tell the story as truthfully and as honestly and as with as much integrity as possible, but you also want to make people laugh. You want to make them cry, and you want to make them feel something. And I think as Jesse explains, and as Jesse just came into the room, and we'll be able to hopefully explain in a little bit, the process, the class that he leads people through, transformations, has a very specific structure. And it's, you know, it's week to week to week, it's 4 weeks. And by the third week or so, part of what is happening is that people who have almost as a survival mechanism been forced to not feel, to not trust, to not believe that there's any hope, to not believe that there's any sense of belonging, are starting to feel those things. And he sort of describes it as, it's like suddenly, you know, nerve endings that are appearing. Yeah. And once you have the nerve endings appear, you have to figure out what to do with those emotions. And I think the act of then having a community here and a support system here that can help people figure out what to do with those new or faintly remembered emotions is really the thing that then cements the process. Yeah. So once you've sort of gotten that help and seen that, you know, when you start the song, people will continue to sing with you, then I think that is like a vicious cycle that becomes a virtuous cycle. And that's where what I make them feel becomes much more important than anything he's telling them about resumes or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Greg. And I believe you filmed the documentary prior to the pandemic, correct? Looking at where we are today, post, and I'm using this very lightly, post-pandemic, or after 2 years of being isolated, going crazy in my house.
Mid-post-pandemic.
There you go. That's a better term for it. Do you think the pandemic made that documentary more relevant, or did it change its importance? You know, how did the pandemic impact the documentary?
I think, I guess I would answer it by saying that the pandemic made the perception of the importance of the documentary very different. I think we were always sitting there going, no, like, this is all about the intersection of race, place, and poverty. There's no more important issue that we face every day than that. That's always the thing. But it's a harder thing to talk about with people when, you know, there isn't a pandemic that is exposing all of the inequities that are already there, or there isn't, you know, a kind of, you know, police violence that's exposing all of the inequities that are already there. And so that confluence, I think, suddenly made what was before, as we were finishing it, you know, 3.6% unemployment, you know, racial equity, maybe not front and center for a lot of people who can change the game, suddenly something that was front and center for a lot of people. So the case we had been making all along, I think now people were seeing it through the filter that we had been seeing it through. And that made it sort of easier to convince people that this is a really compelling way to bring people to a common ground where they can have these tricky conversations.
That's phenomenal. And my last question, Greg, I'm interested in knowing what would be the top 3 items that you would want someone to pull from your documentary after and if you have more, that's fine, but if you can, 3 to 5
right, okay.
Points that you would want a viewer to extrapolate from watching your documentary and just explain them to us.
I think probably the first one, and I would probably answer this differently. You know, if you asked me in 10 minutes, I'd probably answer this differently. But I think, you know, right now my answer is the first one would be that the work that Kara does, the work that Perscolis does, the work that is this work, is incredibly hard work. That it is hard work for the people who are the practitioners of it, and then for the students or the people who are coming through and experiencing it and participating in it. So I think that's really, you know, one of the key lessons that I think we want people to take away, that this is, as Jesse says, this is hard. And then I would say that the next thing I would want people to take out of it is, oh my gosh, I've got to tell everybody I know about this, including every company that I know, that this would be a great way to have an event. That would be the second thing. And then I think, really that that these are, I never like to use the word humanizing, because then you always get the sort of question of, well, humanizing for who? Who didn't see these people as human before? But I think that there is an element of there, but for the grace of God go I, that the movie brings out, that I think is a kind of empathy maker. And what ends up happening sometimes, we've seen, is that when it's used to bring people together, when you can use like a proxy for the experiences, when you see a proxy figure for the experiences that you might have had that you might have not wanted to talk about. Yes, I know, I'm white, you're black, but my sister struggled with addiction. Oh my gosh, my aunt did too. Tell me about your common experiences. That it becomes a sort of a way to triangulate universal feelings that people have, that in a setting, in a corporate setting, or in many other settings, it's just not right. It's not something you're going to talk about. I mean, it's what Nikki just talked about, like that these are not always acceptable things, and that the film can become a vehicle to have conversations that would otherwise maybe be unacceptable in a workplace setting.
Greg, thank you so much for sharing your documentary and your vision with us, and thank you for sharing your perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Jacob.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I will now pass this off to my wonderful colleague, Andy Derelick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Derelick, the Managing Director of the Chicago office, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see everybody here as well. I have the honor of presenting the panel, but you've met most of the panel already. And the panel is called The Power of Alternative Skills Training. So without further ado, all of you that have sat down are going to need to come on back up. The new person, though, would be Jessie Teverbaugh. Jessie, come on up. I did it right? So if you haven't watched the movie, he's kind of the star of the movie and a major inspiration. Thank you, Jessie. So Jessie works at Cara Collective, where we are today. He's the Director of Student and Alumni Affairs. And then Greg, do you want to come back up too? So Greg Jacobs, the owner and co-founder of Siskel Jacobs Productions and the co-director of the Road Up documentary. Again, if you haven't seen it, you've got to. I've watched it twice. I'll probably watch it again this weekend. It's just, the one thing that I think Greg didn't say, it's so respectful and it's so raw and true. And like you all were saying, the people, with common experiences, but it's just, as I had said to you the other day when we spoke, it makes people real and it breaks down barriers. I really appreciated it, so thank you. Nikki, it's an absolute pleasure meeting you. When you're all ready, come on up. But while you're getting yourself set, Damian Howard, who is the Perscola's Chief Enterprise Solutions Officer, is going to be the moderator today. And of course, you all know Nikki Lanier now, so thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone. Hi, how you doing? Good to see you again. I'm back. For like posing and stuff like that. Let me stop. Well, I'm excited about this panel conversation. Thank you all for coming back to spend some more time with me. Hope you don't get sick of me before the end of the day. But I really am enjoying the time that we're spending together. So I have a few questions that I would like to ask this panel. And please feel free. I'm going to start with asking specific questions to individuals. But if you have something to add, just feel free to jump in. Is that okay? Fantastic. So Greg, since you're sitting right here, let me start with you. So before creating this documentary, you probably had a certain perspective around alternative education or how people engage with alternative measures for education and employment. How has that changed since the documentary, or what have you learned in the process of building this documentary, and how has that reinformed some of the ideologies or the processes that you had previously?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, I just want to say I can't believe I'm on this panel. I feel like I'm with two celebrities. This is amazing. So when we started the film, I would say I would say the film has completely informed my perspective on this issue, because I really didn't have much of one before. I had written a book about school desegregation in my hometown, which is Columbus, Ohio, which has gotten me interested in K through 12 education. And then we did a film called No Small Matter about early childhood education, which made me sort of view that as really like the key to unlock so many of the challenges that we face. But I hadn't really thought of or explored alternative skills as a sort of as a theme or as a subject matter. And I think what doing the film made me realize is that the perception I might have had originally was kind of, I guess, I don't know, this lingering like 90s Clinton era, kind of consequences of globalization. Oh, we'll just retrain people, 55-year-olds to do jobs that they had never heard of before, and it'll be easy, kind of thing. And so as a result, I think my thought was these were big, unwieldy programs that were often ineffectual or didn't necessarily connect people to the workplace in ways that were current and effective. And so being here at CARA and seeing what an effective job program is, what they are doing for the people that they are serving, and the ingredients that created that, I think made me understand how good these programs can be and how good the best programs are. And so that was one amazing thing. And then it also sort of, I think, made me understand how essential this work is, that there are, I think it might be Heather Boucher, who's an advisor to Joe Biden now, who's an economist, who talks about the height of the first rung on the ladder now, and how it's so much higher than it used to be. And you have people who are, as they're reaching for it, for a whole variety of reasons, are being pulled down at the same time. And so how do you get to the first rung on the ladder if it's both too high and people are pulling and things are pulling you down? So I think what it struck me that these kind of programs do is that they create footholds that allow you to climb up just enough to be able to reach confidently to that first rung in a way that you can actually hold on and pull yourself up. And so that, Jesus, we need that everywhere in the economy now, because every job involves technology or non-intuitive tools. So it's just sort of a crucial additional sector of the economy that I sort of feels like my eyes have been completely open to, and now I realize just how essential it really is.
Thank you for that, Greg. Really appreciate your perspective on that. Jesse, the star of the show. So glad to meet you in person. So the Road Up focuses on skills training here at CARA Collective and preparing diverse individuals to start a career without the typical 4-year degree. In your opinion, how can we convince business leaders that individuals with this background are just as strong as the candidates who have a 4-year degree?
Oh, right.
Come on, Greg.
Sure, and thank you for inviting me. I love these type of forums. Again, anybody who doesn't know me, this is my favorite topic, this and football. I can talk about this all day long. I will correct you about being the star of the show. The participants in those individuals' lives who we shared, who Greg and John so eloquently put together, are truly the stars of the show. I was just a traffic cop, but I'll be a star. So to the question of, again, it's always been this hidden talent, and people have not recognized, not to label who or society, whatever, but it's always been a hidden talent here, and people sometimes identify people by the mistakes that they make. And again, it just takes and carries on to all aspects of their lives, no matter if it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, a year ago, last week, whatever it was, and sometimes depending on the severity of the mistakes, automatically they've been categorized of unsalvageable or just not a person that has any type of value. And so part of this is, and some of the things that I think what we've identified, not only just at CARE and other workforce development places, is that you come across some of the most talented and gifted individuals that for the circumstance that they come out of would never have been tapped into. And I think it is, if people can kind of understand that mindset. And again, I think when you asked Greg the question before about what would you want to leave people a message, and especially employers, again, when he said, there but for the grace of God go I guarantee you any corporation, any company, anybody in the position of hiring anybody can look into their own family and see some people that are going through or have gone through some of the same struggles, and maybe some of them have gone through those struggles as well. And so they're people just like anybody else, for whatever reason, made some bad choices and things like that. So if we can kind of just take this curtain back and stop getting away from and labeling and categorizing people by the mistakes and the things that they made, because that's not who I am. That's something I did, but it's not who I am.
Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. And Nikki, I would love to hear your perspective as well. Like, when we think about how we engage with businesses and enterprise level firms, how do we go about convincing, or what would be some best practices that you would want to share around making sure that these companies understand that if you have a 4-year degree, or if you don't, you're still just as valuable and just as competent?
I think this is an interesting dispensation in time in which we find ourselves. So employers are more malleable these days than they probably ever have been. And so it's an interesting backdrop against which this work will now work. So there is a renaissance that's happening in most corporate spaces around how work is invoked and commoditized, quite frankly. So with the advent of the gig economy and with the very loud and clear and emphatic and unapologetic position that the younger generation is now taking with regard to how they will choose to access workplaces, employers are now, for the first time really in industrialized society, having to reckon with and respond to what employees really want. And so employees, candidates are sitting in the seat now as interviewee, if you will, really holding all the cards. I mean, that varies to some degree, depending on like region and perhaps sector, but for the most part, the way work is invoked has changed, I would suggest, forever. Though that benefits, I think, more narrowly currently, folks at different generations. I think that it is an interesting philosophical shift that these kinds of very potent workforce development programs could really take full advantage of, because employers are now having to sit somewhat uncomfortably in the seat and sit across from someone and ask questions like, so what do you need from us in order for this workplace to work for you? How would you like to work? Where would you like to work? What would you like to experience in coming here, right? So it's almost like they're holding all the cards. So it's like an interesting kind of opportunity there. And then the second totally different argument, I would say, is around just, again, the browning of the country and the increasing dependence on largely Black and brown. I know that's not necessarily your population exclusively, but there is a smattering, quite a showing of minority talent that is coming through our programs. And so there's, as we know, the browning of the country, we have to have more Black and brown that are in middle class roles in order for macroeconomic theory to continue to persist. And this is a pathway toward that end. So it's a really rich, fertile ground from which we can pick ready now talent to deploy into, like at the macro level, into the jobs that America will need moving forward for economic well-being. And then secondly, it's an interesting place for employers as they are sitting in the seat of having to audition themselves for the talent to come and find them.
Thank you, Nick. I have a follow-up question for you. So, as we look at companies and how they move forward, they simply will need to have a diverse workforce, with a mixture of non-traditional talent, traditional talent, and other alternative educational pathways. Now, you had mentioned something earlier around the Garden framework centers around cultivating talent and pipelines evolving from the past, where it was previously all about the same or one-size-fits-all approach. How do you see companies embracing the Garden approach, and what are some of the best practices that you would want to recommend?
Thank you for asking. So the garden is actually a product of Harper Slade. It's my company where it's coming to market. I want to introduce my colleague Jaden Thomas, who is here with us today. We both came up from Louisville, and Jaden is really responsible for helping to get the garden to market. But it's an idea. It's a training program basically where employers would purchase this garden program in order to really understand how to think very differently and more intimately about their own individual commitment around DEI. So in this metaphor, the garden, employees are the flowers, the soil is the work environment, and the gardener is the architect for equity. So the thought is that if you are a gardener who only understands marigolds, as an example, your whole life has been around marigolds, you know everything about the cadence of the marigold, what the marigold likes to eat, drink, walk, talk, whatever, party, all, marigolds in and out. And so you're moving into these companies, right? And you're a manager, and now you're asked to care for and become a steward over marigolds, daisies, and tulips. The tendency is to treat those daisies and tulips like marigolds, right? We water them like marigolds, we fertilize them like marigolds, we give them the same kind of sunlight, and then they don't flourish, they don't blossom. And now what happens? They get a mentor, right? Or they get on a performance report. Something is wrong with these daisies and tulips because they're not behaving like marigolds. And not only that, but the soil in which these flowers are now growing together, it's inhospitable. It's only cultivated and amended and tilled with the needs of the marigold in mind. So that's this training. It really just helps employers think about it in somewhat of a benign way, right? So it's not like this, people think of DEI and equity as kind of divisive. Some people do, a lot of people do. But when you think about a garden, not so much, right? You get kind of excited about a garden. Gardens are pretty. Who doesn't like a garden? What's wrong with you? So anyway, that's the metaphor that we think about, how we talk about with employers, thinking about cultivating the environment for all flowers to thrive, not just exist, but to thrive.
Thank you for that, Nikki. Jesse, in your opinion, how will Chicago continue to benefit from alternative skills training? Like, what would be the impact, and how can the city continue to benefit from alternative skills training?
I think not only Chicago, but society as a whole can benefit from it because, again, like I mentioned before, it's just tapping into that untapped talent. I think also that we need to also identify, how can we best support and grab people before they get to the point where they have to come to a CARA or other workforce development places. We get to them, and now after, they've gone through all of these challenges and fell through all of these kind of pitfalls, now all of a sudden, people are, how do you save them? How do you save them? One, you're not saving anybody. They're just human beings who've made some mistakes. But how can we mitigate the mistakes up front? And I believe just industries and companies as a whole should start looking and tapping into it. And I come from an old school place where back when I went to high school, there were trades in the high school. You can learn to be a carpenter, a mechanic, a chef, HVAC, whatever it is, you can become that. Everybody is not college bound. And so if some of these corporations who are in these industries can kind of go and they still want to kind of keep feeding into their pipeline of viable employees, why not invest in some of these partnership with some of these high schools and things like that? I know some of the kids I know that I'm mentoring things are in high school. It's boring to them. If you're not an athlete or something like that, it's pretty much nothing there to go for. You go in and try to get home without being killed or shot or bullied or anything else. There's nothing for them to do. It's a real easy fix if some of these corporations who are truly interested in uplifting communities, and again, their bottom line, it's just an investment that I just kind of, for the life of me, understand why nobody has not thought about that and bringing that back into the educational system as being a part of a student's experience.
Thank you for that. And I have one final round of questions for all of our panelists. If companies and individuals listened to the strategies, best practices, and all of the ideas that you guys are presenting to this group today, What would the ideal workplace look like, and what would you like to see from an ideal workplace?
You go.
That's kind of hard, and especially, we just come out of this weird place, and I know you just kind of talked about, that employees now have the best and the upper hand. Again, employers are saying, what can we and how can we make things better for you? I mean, I think part of what has happened in this pandemic world and things like that has kind of made us a little relaxed on productivity and things like that. Everybody wants to be able to work from home, right? Everybody thinks, and again, I mean, I have to come in to work 5 days a week. What? And you're a janitor, so how can I not do that? You mean, how can I do that? So I think when you say the perfect workplace, I think sometimes we're all in this world, and because like you mentioned, employers are at a disadvantage because there's a need. We can't even fly. I'm going on a trip next week, and I'm so worried about them canceling my flight because they ain't got enough pilots. So there's not enough people to kind of do these jobs. So I think we're in a flux right now to kind of redefining, what is a perfect work environment and things like that. Again, I get accused of this even in an organization that I come from, because I've been here for 20 years and I've helped build what we've done here. And over the years now, again, there's this influx of new talent and people with great ideas, and sometimes they don't mesh with old school way of thinking and getting some things done. And so you kind of give and take in some areas like that. So I'm fighting that internally with my own kind of idea of where this type of work, and not only that, the workforce itself is going, because I need to be able to articulate that and meet individuals that come into care at that same point in the mindset and where they are, so I'm struggling with that myself.
Thank you for sharing your perspective.
I just don't think that I should have the last word in any way on this. I don't want to. So that's the thing. I just wanted to say, and also because I have to steal this from you before you get a chance to maybe say it, because I did a little homework beforehand, and I was watching a video that had Nikki being interviewed, and there was a phrase that you used, and I will probably get it wrong because I can't remember it exactly, but I think it was presumption of mattering or presumption of belonging, one of those two. And I think that was sort of a way of articulating something that I had been struggling to articulate, which is that, that sense that when you come into the workplace, the struggle that you were talking about earlier, the grind of having to think about, how am I belonging today? Am I safe? What am I saying? Am I going to have to fit in with people who aren't thinking about fitting in because they don't have to? I think a workplace that understands that everybody wants the presumption of mattering, and that will make everybody who is working there infinitely more productive in every aspect of their lives. I think that would be the supreme ideal of a workplace. And the matrix of making that happen is impossible, probably, because there are so many ways to matter and so many identities that we bring to in the door of the workplace, or to our computers if we're at home in our pajamas. But I would just, cheat and steal that phrase, which I hope I can borrow without having to pay a royalty from here on out. But a workplace that brings to it that where everybody can bring to it the presumption of mattering. That's what I would say.
Nikki?
Yeah, I just would say that the garden really is my ideal. I mean, like, really a beautiful, if you could picture in your mind a beautiful flourishing garden with rich flowers and plants, all thriving in their own way and having each of their individual needs met and their collective cultural needs affirmed and acknowledged. And everything in that environment supports that, and the gardeners understand and know. I mean, that is my ideal. That's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you for that, Nikki. So we have 5 minutes for Q&A. So I would like to open up the forum for the audience. Anybody have any questions? And I'll rush a mic to you if you have a question. Here you go. Okay, no problem. Let me stand over here.
This is wonderful. I learning about this organization through Nikki, who really we became best friends yesterday. They need the microphone. Oh, we do need the microphone. Oh,
You done got me in trouble.
I beg your pardon. My name is Pepper Miller. I'm a native of Chicago, and I am a market researcher and thought leader in the multicultural marketing space. I help large corporations better understand and engage Black America so that they can have loyal customers and a positive bottom line. Yeah, that's my elevator speech. So my question, Nikki, you were talking about, you mentioned, I wanted you to revisit for us again, because you're quite a storyteller, but I wanted you to revisit again equality and equity again. And you were talking, you led with 3 points, but I only heard you talk about one of the points. But just very simply talk about the differences between equity and equality again, because I think that is really, really important. And I know in my industry, we constantly get it confused. So I would love for you to have that clear definition of that for us.
Oh, okay, perfect. So, okay, equality chases sameness. Equity chases proportional fairness, in my view. So what we have promulgated as a country in the name of equality are laws that are intended to beat away manifestations of a belief system. So if you believe that women are not equal, if you believe that Black people don't matter as much as white, if you believe that veterans shouldn't have any rights, if you somehow believe that either overtly or somewhere in your psyche, that manifests in certain ways, right? What equality or equal opportunity laws have done is say, you can't manifest that in that way. You have to hire, right? You can't ask these kinds of questions. You can't do this thing. You can't say this thing. We never deal with the thing, right? So equity requires understanding where you sit from a belief standpoint that then informs how you choose to behave. So at least the way that I frame it, the way that I think about it. So that's one thing. But secondly, the reason why equality doesn't work for me at this point is because we have long since left the time frame where chasing equality would have mattered economically. If we had done really, if EEO affirmative action had actually worked and been permitted to work 50 years ago, or the ADA had worked when it was promulgated, or ADEA or Title VII, if those laws, like we've always had to have laws to punctuate what the human condition should have always been. But even then, we've had these laws that we still aren't honoring, right? We still are pursuing behaviors that act in Congress with these exact laws. So anyway, so the equality issue around how do we treat men and women the same? How do we treat Black, white, Hispanic the same? How do we treat non-pregnant folks the same as, that's never really been the issue. How do you honor that difference and still assign humanity, the presumptive humanity, which is what, in my view, the equity pursuit now must become because of the consequences around the browning of the country. Equality is ultimately the outcome. Yeah, so our motto with the company is, we advance equity for some and equality for all. But equality will never get us to equity. Equity will get us to equality. Yep.
That is wonderful. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Angevine with Perscolis. And Jesse, I found, as I think everyone did, the movie so powerful, but one of the most interesting things is that it seems like there's no magic point where someone all of a sudden has it made. And it seems like it's going to be a constant continual battle and work. And I just wanted to hear you talk about that, because I thought that was a message that I got, that you can't just say, okay, we're going to have this fairy tale ending. So anyway, if you could talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, as you sit in our room, we have these concepts: 5 ways to transform your life, change your behavior, know the deepest truth, look with new eyes, don't relax, and think outside the box. These are kind of our commandments here. These are our staple. These are our lottery numbers. This is what our curriculum is built around. This is what our organization is based on. Again, yes, we're in the workforce development business, but we're truly about transforming lives. You know, if I get somebody a job, will that make them a healthier human being? What if I make a person a healthier human being? A job and everything else comes along with that. So it's this holistic approach to individuals that we want to take. Yes, it's that job that we dangle. That's the carrot that we get people to come in. But our true, mission is, and that's where someone, when they come in, are like, I ain't signed up for this shit. Damn, get up out my business. And just give me a job. But again, if I don't take care of my personal life, it's going to creep into my professional life, and vice versa. And so how about we approach this holistic approach to individuals as we continue? And so we always say, again, even the road up is creative, or how the title of the movie, sometimes we think it's not. The road up is not linear. It goes this way and you go down, then you might hit a pathway and things like that. So there's different ways into success. And success don't always have to be that brass ring. Small successes. If I just got, if I was addicted to drugs and alcohol and I finally made the decision to go get some help, that's a success, and that needs to be honored, and so part of this idea, sometimes people come in and they think, oh, I didn't came through care and I've transformed my life. And I'll say to anybody and say, you know what, do you think transformations last? And I'm asking that to the audience or anybody else. What do you do? Do you think transformations last? They don't. Neither does bathing. That's why we have to do it every day. You have to practice it and do these things every single day. And as soon as you stop, you will start reverting and going right back to ground zero. And that's what a lot of us have challenges in, because at some point in time, we think we have arrived. We think we have made it, and we relax. And we don't look for what's my next challenge, what's my next triumph. And again, that don't mean I have to find a cure for cancer or world peace and all those other things, but can I just be the best dad that I can possibly be, the best mom that I can possibly be? Those little small things that continue to get to strive us to being the healthiest human being. So that's what transformations is about, is to continue to improve. And once you start doing that, it's the end of the road. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Jesse. Any other questions from the audience? If not, Greg, Jesse, and Nikki, thank you for sharing your time and your perspective with us today. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Thank you. So now I will introduce another dynamic individual who will take us from here. Thank you, Jesse. We're wonderful. So I want to introduce Franklin Reed, who is the Executive Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Tech Systems. In his role, Franklin is an important member of Tech Systems' leadership team and has been an instrumental part of Diverse by Design, where he plays the role as our advisory board chair and diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging champion. Beyond all of that, Franklin is a dear friend of mine. He is a humble man, and he is a brilliant leader, and he's a partner of mine, and I'm just really excited and humble to continue to be his partner. So I'll introduce to others and reintroduce to many of you that are in here. This is Franklin Reed, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. All right, note to self, use bigger font. Keep pretending that I'm not aging. Thank you all so very much. I want to start with this statement and present this to some of you all, that the war for talent is over and the talent has won. In his book, Culture Renovation, Kevin Oakes talks about this, that the war for talent is over and the talent has won. Now, before I discuss how talent has won this war, let me introduce myself and provide a little more context to what Damien shared. As he said, I'm the Executive Director of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Tech Systems. I also have this incredible privilege of serving as the chair of the Diverse by Design Advisory Board, a board that is comprised of industry leaders who not only think about these topics that we're discussing here today, but they're also actively working to resolve some of these challenges, not only within their organizations, but also outside their respective organizations. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce several of them to you in our final panel for today. At Tech Systems, we accelerate business transformation for our customers. We bring real-world expertise to solve complex problems, complex technology issues, and talent challenges at global scale. All of our solutions revolve around providing great talent, sourcing, attracting, retaining, and deploying that talent to over 80% of the Fortune 500, including some of the organizations that are here today. And for decades, organizations, including Tech Systems, we've dictated where and how we find, attract, and engage that talent. And that motto worked. However, just like historical periods that have shifted modern society, like the Industrial and the Information Revolution, we can either cooperate with this shift, this change, or we can continue to resist it, only to find ourselves on the outside looking in. Think of Blockbuster and Eastman Kodak. No one here works for either one of those companies, right? Neither one of those organizations took advantage of the full opportunities that were in front of them. Now, admittedly, many of us who have been in this world of talent acquisition, people strategy, diversity, we've been somewhat slow to this conclusion. But it is time for us to wave our white flag. And the sooner we do this, the faster we'll be able to reimagine and implement the strategies that will position us and our organizations in the best way to actually attract, engage, and retain our top talent. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I get it. The idea that the generation that made TikTok and Instagram recruiting a thing, new hire swag and expectation, and health and well-being benefits a staple, I get it. The idea that that generation has more power than they've had before might challenge some of us. However, that generation has also forced us to invest in and engage pools that have been marginalized, underestimated, and on the lopsided distribution of opportunity. And it's been proven that within these often overlooked pools are dedicated, capable, and ambitious women and men who, when given access to opportunity and training, they will excel. So the talent has won. Our final panel will explore attraction strategies and talent pipelines. The panelists will share insights they've been leveraging within their own organizations to identify and onboard great talent from non-traditional sources, including partners like Perscolis. So please join me. I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll give them a round of applause as they take their seat here. But please join me in welcoming Julie Dillman, the Global Head of Operations for Chubb, Tina Simmons, the Senior Vice President of HR at Comcast NBC Universal, Maria Medrano, the Senior Director of Diversity Strategy, Narrative, and Partnerships at Google, and our narrator, Nikki Lanier, CEO of Harper Slade. Let's give them a hand as they come. As they come, I want to make one final observation. I want to highlight the configuration of this wonderful panel, all women. Now, often, women's voices aren't heard when we have panels configured because men dominate this space, particularly the technology space. In fact, they even have given it a name, Manos. Manos is what they've given it, all men panels. Yeah, it is a name. Well, today we're intentionally swinging the pendulum the other way, and we've got whammels. So here you go.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, that's crazy. I think we have another. All right. Hopefully that. See if we get that going. Can y'all hear me? Is this working? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm so honored to have this facilitated conversation with these amazing women that I've just got a chance to get to know a little bit in the back, and I'm sure we'll have opportunities to continue to connect. This is a really important topic, and arguably this is what brings it all home. So we've talked a lot about the theories, ideals, beliefs, tools, references, and resources to think about how to make their workplace much better in the areas of DEI. But at the end of the day, we have to bring diverse talent in and keep that talent in. And so that's why I'm really super excited about this conversation. So we're gonna just get started for the sake of time so we can have as much great conversation as possible. I wanna ask the first question to Tina. And so maybe if as I pose these first questions, if you can just tell the audience just a tad bit about the work that you do, and then if you wouldn't mind answering the question. So talk about how your organization attracts and cultivates diverse talent. What do you do to create an environment to make sure that that talent is thriving, and then fostering the pipeline so that there's like this constant throughput of this diverse talent? So if you could answer that question, but first tell us a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. I have the honor, I'm Tina Simmons with Comcast NBC Universal, and I have the honor, and I do say it's an honor, to lead HR for our central division based out of Atlanta, or Atlanta. My footprint that I have responsibility for is as far north as Illinois. So we have the greater Chicago region included, in Indiana, Michigan, and as far south as Florida. So I like to say, in my footprint, I have just as many people who believe that Joe Biden is our president as those who do not. So it's always a very challenging and interesting day that I've got. So in response to your question, and first of all, Nikki, I have to say you are absolutely phenomenal. And looking at you online and, reading about you really don't put to life the fullness of who you really are. So, and I wanted to open with that because I wasn't planning on answering this question in this way, but you actually triggered this thought. So just a very quick story from a talent attraction and development perspective. So when, in the midst of the pandemic, and this was maybe a month after the George Floyd murder, my boss at the time and I were hosting these listening sessions and having, connections with folks, but all virtually. Although we have a big workforce that's technicians that are out in the field and also retail agents, but we were doing these virtual listening sessions. And so, he and I had a whole thing going on, listening into what was really most impactful to our employees, et cetera, in the midst of the pandemic. And again, this was before the vaccines or anything like that. So anyway, it got to a point, and I was with you, Nikki, when you said that you just would be, Monday morning and you're breaking up inside. So anyway, I'm giving this whole spiel that I'd given probably 10 times before. And I literally, and there were 500 people on this virtual event, and I broke down in the middle of my talk. In the middle, that kind, like at church, where it's like, take your time, that kind of break. And I couldn't even catch my breath. And it literally came out of nowhere, and I never had an experience like that before at work. And so I was mortified. But I work with an incredible group of people, and they were like, take your time. Okay. So I got through, finished up my talk. So I'm in my office alone. There were maybe 5 people in the office, me, my boss, and maybe a couple of others. And so I'm trying to get myself ready for my next meeting and everything, and I'm wiping my eyes, trying to fix my makeup back, and I hear this thump, 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 thump down the hall. I'm the only one on my floor. My boss is another floor up. He's the only one on his floor. Thump, 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 thump. My boss, Catholic, over 50, white male, from Florida. And I turn around and I see him coming into my office with his mask on, and he just comes over and he just hugs me. Now, this was in the midst of the pandemic. So it was the first hug I'd gotten from anyone other than my husband in like a year, okay, in a long time. And he hugged me, And then he left and went thump, 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 right back up to his office for his next meeting so he wouldn't be late. But in that moment, I'd been working for him for a few years. He saw me, and he saw like what you described in terms of kind of what you can't articulate, and you can't, walk in someone else's shoes or empathize with them when you don't, but he saw in that moment what matters, and that, for me, from a talent attraction perspective, that's why I've been with this company for 22 years, and this is my 5th company. So it's not as if I haven't had experience with other companies, but things like that, because it's not the organizations, it's not the companies that are able to contribute to this conversation and making a difference from an equity perspective. It's individuals. It's an individual like that who hired me into my role, although I was in customer operations before. Half of my career was customer operations. And so here I am going to be a senior leader in HR when I came from a customer operations. He's the one who took that chance on me. So it's these individuals, and that individual happens to work for Comcast NBC Universal, and that's how, again, we make a difference. So sorry, I had to go there. You're the one, Nikki, who triggered it. But we definitely, when I think about, and I'm so proud, and that's why I say it's an honor for me to have the role that I have, we focus on things from a join, engage, thrive, and leave perspective, right? So how do we make sure that we're out there in the marketplace, and we are first of all, it starts with the product. So if you got a crappy product, no one's going to want to work for you anyway. But we have incredibly innovative products. So that's the first thing. About Universal Parks and, the NBC and SNL and all of the cool innovative technology that we've got. So you start with that, and then you lead with jobs that are that are an entree to the middle class, which is so incredibly important. So jobs that are attractive. And then I also, again, with my footprint, organically, I can't help but have a diverse workforce. All I can do is mess it up. That's all I can do. But when we talk about, so for entry-level jobs particularly, I mean, I've got, in my last hiring, we hire 70% people of color, 70% people of color in the footprint that I have responsibility for. And then it's bringing them in with our more senior level jobs. It's ensuring that you've got panels that are diverse. So you make sure that you have females on, that you've got people of color, that you've got LGBTQ+, that you've got people who are representative of our employees and our customers on these panels to interview people as they come in, so you get a chance. Because you're not going to, I love your garden metaphor. I think that it's brilliant. And then we've got employee resource groups to make sure that you're engaged, that you want to belong, et cetera, et cetera. They're so, and we invest in you and development, and you're going back to school, or if you don't want to get the full-time degree, et cetera, and then making sure that you're thriving in that environment. And then the other piece that I'll add, because I want to make sure that my colleagues here have an opportunity to speak, is from a leave perspective, that's just as important to us as well. Because you know what? When you do leave, we still want you to be a customer. So we best treat you with kindness and with and invest in you while you're with us, because we do want to maintain that relationship when you do leave. So that's kind of a real quick, and I'm hopeful that I'll hop in when my colleagues speak, but that's kind of our philosophy around hiring. But it really does start with talent attraction and retention. It does start with the individuals inside that great big company called Comcast.
Yeah, well, gosh, thank you so much. That was beautifully rich, lots of dimension and texture to that response. And I particularly like the way you talked about attraction ever threaded throughout the employee life cycle. So it doesn't just stop when you get there, like, okay, we're done with our efforts, but even as you're exiting, how do we remain attractive to this exiting employee? That's really powerful. Do either two of you have a plus one on that? Do you have anything else you want to weigh in before I move to my next question, which will be posed to Julie? Go ahead. No, Maria, go ahead. My next question's for Julie, but if you want to say something on that.
No, I just wanted to reinforce that piece of it. All you called out is the key piece is the retention aspect, that the retention piece matters equally as much as what you are attracting into the organization, because the equation is very simple. You hire minus the attrition, and then you have your representation, and so you can't have that equation be off balance. And so who you work for matters, point in case. Who you hire matters, right? they reinforce the culture. So all of these things, you can't be doing them individually. They have to be interconnected to actually see the outcome that you desire for your organization, because at the end of the day, that makes up the culture, which I know we're going to continue to talk about that piece, but I just wanted to reinforce the importance of that, because the retention piece is a really critical piece.
So important.
Yeah. Super, super important. Okay, thank you for that, both of you. Julie, so your work is global. I mean, it's like you're across the whole planet, interplanetary. I don't know. That's what I'm going to say. Interplanetary HR. So when you think about your experience now, and working with who I know, the C-suite leaders that you engage with, it's been noted that having a diverse workforce promotes productivity. We all know that. We all have heard that, and the economic growth, of course, which is near and dear to my heart. But what would you or have you recommended specifically to the C-suite in terms of how they think about and swallow the ideals associated with recruiting and attracting a diverse workforce? What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually have the honor of sitting in that C-suite with my company, the only female that sits in the room of 13, and not an incredible diverse look around that team. So oftentimes I have to sort of be the voice for many flowers, and take that opportunity pretty seriously. But I sort of look at it like this. Diversity is the management discipline. Like, we need people representing, to Nikki's point, all of the flowers that could make our company equitable and inclusive. So I tend to, when I think about the C-suite, because we're an executive group, when you work for a large company and you sit in that room, that we're used to getting things done through the practice of management disciplines and measuring everything. And that's important, but that's just then sometimes when we tend to stop. Okay, how many of this did we get? How many of this left? How many, what did they say about us? Oh, they're not understanding who we are because they said this about us. Let's go out and champion our culture or what have you. So that's sort of the dialogue in the room. It is an important, piece to measure, to have diverse slates, to make sure that we understand retention, understand the voice of our, ERGs, et cetera. But to me, that's the mechanics of diversity. To really get to the equity, then will lead to inclusion, that will then lead to the business results we want, because we have this diversity that allows us to represent our customers and to represent, a broader thinking base. There's more. And so I often talk about it as head and heart. Diversity is the head, equity and inclusion is the heart. And that's, Nikki, you said it beautifully, and you pretty much described what C-suites have to do perfectly. But that heart part is really, really hard. So as I look at all of you, I encourage you and to try to further that dialogue about the heart piece, or in Nikki's words, the narrative that we all bring to the table. And then we're, I as a female, even I'm like, okay, what will they think of my shoes? I mean, I've been at this for 31 years and I'm still like, should I wear hose today or should I not? Because will I be judged? The other, sort of context I would give on this is, as Nikki described, I am a corporate executive sitting over technology operations and our digital initiatives across 55 countries. And I find that our C-suite is much more sensitized to the cultures in Asia or the cultures in Colombia or Ecuador, because first of all, they tend to look more homogeneous. So I was telling a group of folks, I just came back from Korea. Well, we all understand that culture. We all understand who they are. We all, sort of respect and nurture that culture because that's who they are, but it tends to be not a multicultural environment. So then you come back to the US and we're like, we don't have that sensitivity to our multicultural heritage here. So that's the other thing that resonates with me. It's a different approach to DEI here in the US than it is, globally, and making sure that companies who are global attend to that and pay as much attention to, sort of those dynamics. So, those are sort of my thoughts around the C-suite.
Either of you have anything to add?
Yeah, really quickly, I will say that the other piece that started to change, and I mean, all companies have an opportunity to improve. We, in Comcast, NBC Universal, we're right there as well, but we have made strides, and the only way we've been able to make those strides is because it's not the head of HR that's talking about the fact that we need diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It is the leaders, each function. So our CFO, our head of sales and marketing, or et cetera, and then working with their HR partners in order to enact that, to make it possible. But it can't just be me and my HR colleagues in the HR community talking about it. Otherwise, it just does not happen.
And when the conversation is at that level, guess what? Every C-suite is looking at metrics and data. That's what they talk about. And so it forces the need to actually have the conversation around accountability and really have these conversations so we can measure the impact and measure the outcome. And that's what excites me about doing this work. Having been in this space for 22 years, it's like it's a different kind of conversation at the right level.
Yeah, so those are really compelling points. And if you wouldn't mind, I want to just call an audible real quick, because I would love any of you that has a point of view on this. It does matter immensely who is talking about this at any given moment, right? To what extent have any of you had like the board engagement? Your board engagement on this is so important, and under what auspices that board discussion happens. So is it only in the context of, is it ESG, or is it only in the context of compliance? Like, so the board's posture, I think, is important on this. Do any of you have any visibility to that?
Yeah, in my world, our board is very active on the topic and not in the realm of ESG. And so we run the numbers through everything from succession planning, who's on the talent list, why aren't certain people on the talent list. That all goes to our board. Even the succession planning and the numbers around. We actually put pictures of people in this, so if you think top 150 to 200 executives, our board goes through those names with pictures. And pictures are important, very important. Yeah, so that's one perspective.
We also, our board is very engaged as well, and definitely from a succession planning perspective, we look at all of that. But the other thing that we've started going into, taking a deeper dive, is we do look at our employee engagement metrics by ethnicity. So understanding, for instance, why am I seeing a slide in actually white males? White males, their engagement is dropping a bit versus our Black, Asian, Hispanic women. So making sure that we go in, it's like any other business. We have to know our numbers with any other business, and it truly is that from a diversity perspective as well. So making sure that we go a level deeper, so it's not just the quantity, right? It's not just the activities, but it's the impact, and it's ultimately the quality as well, and that comes through some of the qualitative surveys and things of that nature.
Excellent, thank you so much. Okay, the next question is from Maria. Oh, Maria, so I mean, you two are also with a global, amazing company, and one of the things that we all looked at in preparing for this panel today is some stats here that are specific to Chicago. And what we found that Chicago has among the highest share of female founders at corporations, and exceeds the national average of Black and Latino employment by, looks like, more than 50%, which is incredible. So how do we prove economic equity and diversity as professional strengths to the rest of us? So Chicago's doing well, seems to be doing better. So how do you take messages like that and stats like that to Google or maybe to the community? I mean, you're on West Coast, so to what extent are these kinds of statistics relevant there, and how do they help mobilize economic arguments around advancing economic outcomes for people of color?
Yeah, so I can tell you that looking at one aspect of how we're looking at talent is being able to meet talent where they are. So being able to understand the markets and where talent are is a key aspect to our strategy, which is why Chicago is one of our big investment locations, right, in regards to growth and ensuring that we have opportunities here. At the end of the day, Google makes great products, and the products that we make are meant for society, the globe as a whole, which means that we need to understand its users, which means that we need to understand the people, and we need to make sure that we're hiring those individuals who are actually making the product. So it is on us to ensure that we're doing our part to ensure we have a representative talent market that's actually building the products, actually testing the products, that's actually engaging in the designs and inviting folks into that participation, which I can talk hours and hours about how we leverage our own ERGs to make that happen, right? How we make sure we're looking at that even from our people that are in the organization. That's one piece that keeps us focused around this sense of what we say belonging means for us at Google, and ensuring that when we actually bring in the talent, we actually are creating the communities and the support systems to ensure that we are retaining the talent. And the belonging piece has actually become one of the key accountability points of our strategy, not in the DEI space, but at the corporate level. Again, because who talks about it matters, right? So when we're talking about belonging, it's not just our Chief Diversity Officer, Melanie Parker, who's talking about belonging, it's our CEO, it's the business leaders that are there, and that they have an understanding of what belonging means. And the other piece that I'll share as well is that when we're talking about the diversity piece, it isn't just about the people. Yes, the obvious thing is traditionally has always been the counting of people, right? The individuals are which represent people, but we've taken it further around workplace. When we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, how does that look like in our workplace, especially as our company is evolving to a hybrid organization, which is new. Prior to the pandemic, I mean, everybody wanted to be on the Google campus. Why would you want to be home? And now it's very different, considering that we have individuals that are immunocompromised, right? Or you have parents, you have elderly care. There's so many different situations. So we really angle on that belonging piece. And it's important to call this out because when we look at the diversity, like in cities in Chicago or in New York or in Texas or in California, wherever it may be, it's making sure that we're understanding those unique aspects that really respect who each of us are as individuals to really meet them where they are. And then the last piece is on the products. So the products that we're building are really built for all of us to consume, to leverage, to buy. That's the one thing that excites me about being at Google is we build great products that are at that great price point, right? That actually allows people to participate and leverage our products. So it's something that we're constantly thinking about. It's not something that is just insular to, a diversity practice. My team and I say we're influencers, right? We're having conversations, we're educating, we're also learning. We're also spend a lot of time being proximate. We spend a lot of time in understanding the impact that we can have in whatever it is that's being worked on across this Google land, as I like to call it. And I think that's the biggest opportunity that really excites me because I've done this work in the tech sector for 25 years across large organizations, and I see the difference. And that's what's really exciting. And it's exciting to see leaders like my friends here who are leading this important work and asking the right questions, who may not necessarily be in these diversity roles, but they're leaders in an organization and they're asking the right questions and making the ask to actually have folks change their outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Either of you have a follow-on to that? All right, so why don't...
Maria can drop the mic on that one.
Drop that mic, Maria, yes. I love the note on proximity and just being present in proximity and understanding those nuances that are associated with right where you are and what the need set might be. Okay. What say you, ladies and gentlemen in the audience? We'd love to hear from you. Any questions, comments, reactions to what has been shared thus far? Do I need to do something?
Thank you. So I love hearing about the importance of retention in the organizations, but I think it's also really important to address growth for individuals within their organizations. Can you talk about what your companies are doing to encourage people who wouldn't normally feel comfortable advocating for themselves or maybe asking for the promotion, asking for the raise, having those conversations? What are your companies doing to bring those opportunities to the people who don't normally see themselves doing that?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, we've all talked about the ESGs and the important role that they can play and the voice they can have, but also specific mentoring and development programs related to whatever, group that we're working with. There's, many of them, obviously, but I think that sponsorship is really important, and meeting them where they are in terms of the difficulties that sometimes can be faced as they work through that. Enrolling people in programs outside of the company that would help them better find a voice and the skills that they need to advance. And then one thing for our company, because of sort of the work that we need to do with diversity at the top and people not always seeing themselves in the C-suite, is making sure that our C-suite has the training and the ability to speak to diversity on a very human level, and mentors. We heard a lot from our employees that, yeah, it's nice to, at first I was a little insulted. It's nice to have, female mentorship or, a Black female mentor, but I'd actually like the CFO to mentor me. He's white, they don't say it that way, but I would like that mentoring because I aspire to be a CFO. And so we do a lot of training around that with senior leaders so that they can be good sponsors and mentors, and very deliberate programs around that.
We, so for any of our frontline or entry-level roles, there's almost forced promotion because we have very specific career progression plans for all of our customer-facing, customer-supporting roles. So you don't have a choice in moving on up, and that's how you earn more, is by that progression. So that's thing number one. Number two, for more kind of the leadership roles, we have, and especially for the more senior level roles, every quarter, in fact, I'm prepping for our next session, we have the president of the cable division, all of the HR, the senior HR leadership, and the business leaders that report into that president. And we talk about talent, and with pictures, right? And we talk about, and we come to the table, these are the roles that we're looking to fill. And then we come to the table with the talent that we want to highlight, right? And then we go around and we talk about our talent, we talk about the roles, and we actually get some kind of cross-pollination. So someone that I might not have thought about for a senior HR role who's in operations, and operations leaders are nothing if not HR leaders, then that brings them some visibility. But the other piece to your question about how do you help people who aren't ready, who can't kind of advocate for themselves, that's the first piece, is that you almost don't have a choice there either, because we're talking about you, and you ultimately have a sponsor. As Julie mentioned, that's so incredibly important. So you'll have that sponsor, and I find that the nerves kind of go down, and you're much better at having the conversation one-on-one on a human level with that sponsor who can help prepare you for what's next. You wouldn't have been in the conversation for a promotion if you weren't doing something hella good in your role, right? I mean, and then there's the conversation as well about, everybody can't promote. Sometimes, that anxiety you have about that, maybe it's because maybe you shouldn't, because there are only so many roles at that level, but being able to have a sponsor and a mentor really for that, to help you understand that and to make sure you're having those real transparent conversations, because everybody doesn't get an award. No, and having those frank conversations, I think, is number one, what I see our teammates want, particularly those coming in new to the company.
And I'll just quickly add that, retention and progression for us is hand in hand. You're not going to retain talent unless people are seeing movement, right, for progression. We turn it on its head and we say we want people to stay and thrive, right? That's the objective of ensuring that we have the great, most, appealing, we say, employee base, that they're happy and they're content. And so part of it is the opportunities we have. That's where I see our ERGs play a really, really key role in having conversations and sharing what does it mean to be progressing, because many will find that they don't even have that understanding. And so you meet the different talent where they are. And I use that often because it's so true. It's just respecting people where they are. So whether it be through their ERGs when you're having fireside chats, whether it be through the training departments that are there, they're always on with the virtual opportunities that are there. Also, managers, making sure that we are building up capabilities for managers so managers know they have a responsibility to ask the questions. What is it that you're interested in doing? What makes you passionate? What are you thinking about next? So that it's happening so often from different perspectives that it starts to just become a natural way of how everyone is thinking about, oh, I'm really excited I'm doing this work, but I really feel like I want to be doing something next. And it just helps build the muscle that is required. I mean, I think back to when I was first starting in my career, the nervousness of thinking about my career and the conversation. So now where I'm at now, I'm like, yeah, let's have the conversation. Like, I'm welcome to have the conversation, but I know it's because of practice. And so you have to create those opportunities within the organization to have that opportunity to practice.
Yep, perfect, perfect, perfect. All of that is fantastic. I believe we might be at time. Oh, nope, yep, we got another question. We're not at time.
So this question is initially for you, Nikki, but I think I'd like to hear the panelists also piggyback as you explain this, because I've heard you explain this, but I'd like to hear how the panelists address this from their company and why this is an imperative. And you hinted at it today, this direct line between the browning of America and economic imperative, macroeconomics. Can you thread that line and make that connection, one, and then two, how that explanation influences the programs, initiatives, and strategies that you all have, that your companies have embarked upon?
Sure. So their urgency around the browning of the country, by 2045, minorities, specifically Black people, Hispanic people, will make up the majority in the available working class. That means that Black and Brown must also be the majority, at least in the middle class, for the entire economic construct as we know it to continue to exist. That's important because fiscal policy agents and monetary policy agents, i.e. Congress and Federal Reserve, pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the middle class. It's the first place that these policy folks look to determine if the economy is performing well or not. And so we look to like what's happening with consumption, with home ownership, what's happening with supply, demand, saving, spending, what's happening with educational attainment. The first place we look is the middle class. And it has always majority been white. Always, since we've been studying it. So we haven't had to contemplate impediments per se to getting into middle class that are structural or institutional. And so said differently, after 25, America will be relying more on its Blacker and browner citizen in order to buoy the sustenance of the middle class, of the entire economic construct. Middle class is $60,000 to $120,000 income earner. Those jobs, that wage is typically earned in America's workplace. And the biggest impediment right now to fluidity and economic mobility in and through the $60,000 to $120,000 income is racism and the way that it manifests in work. So that's why at Harper Slade, Jaden and I, we focus on Black people, Hispanic people at work. That's our audience because we see the urgency around what we're advancing toward. So with that, ladies, so yeah, I mean, so just the idea of, okay, so how do we kind of in an accelerated way then amplify, activate, accelerate the full potency of that particular population up and through the employment rate ranks with a sense of urgency and discipline and intentionality.
Called it out, Nikki. I mean, they're the consumers of the future. I mean, I understand Black and brown people are already big consumers. I completely get that. But it's an even bigger weighting in terms of the contribution to the overall gross domestic product. And so if that, I mean, that is, it's, you know, right there for every company that is trying to sell something in the United States. It's really important that we be able to, as you said, you know, kind of sustain the middle class. So I think that could be a rallying cry that it's beyond, it's just, you know, diversity is a good thing to do. We're way beyond that argument. You know, this is for our society to continue as we know it or as we like it to be. That's a necessary piece, I would think. So it's the business case.
Yeah, you'll get me started here. I mean, my mom had me when she was 16 years old. I was born in Section 8 housing, raised there, lived on food stamps. I went to the poorest schools in the San Francisco Mission District. Like, I was a statistic. I should not be sitting on this panel. I should not have gone to high school, let alone college, let alone corporate or graduate degrees. Like, it's just, it's not even, people hear my story and they're like, what? It doesn't match. But I think that's the imperative of what's now, is people sharing their stories so others see that we need you to be in middle class. And what does it take to get you there? Because we all are dependent on it. It's for the future of our children and generations, and not creating a bigger disparity of the us and them, but how do we get closer? And so that's what excites me about the work that I'm doing at Google, is the opportunity to be able to do this work with a company that is really looking to, like we say, grow with Google, share our resources with our certifications, with our, with the conversations we have, with what we share on YouTube. I mean, the list goes on, because we need to be ensuring that every company understands that there is a heightened dependency on ensuring that we get this right. And I think a lot of it has just that shared understanding and sharing stories to make sure that there's not much more that is different from one another. It's just the opportunities that have been created, and how do we come closer together?
I'll just quickly close with, at a macroeconomic level, you set aside, it's the right thing to do, which I don't mean really set it aside, but if you set that aside, it's a matter of corporate viability and economic viability. And I think the more that companies understand the importance of their future viability depends on having a workforce that is trained and able to manage in most of the jobs that we will have. It's viability as opposed to, and just an imperative.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, these are all really good points, and I think it is about how do we frame the argument, and really trying to find ways for capital to be introspective, capitalist systems to introspect, and right thing to do is not, and this is not to besmirch corporate environments, but they're just not built to respond to that. They're built to respond to other stimuli. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things, I mean, I would encourage all of you to take a look at what the Fed has promulgated on a lot of these studies, and just Google, what do we rely on in terms of the middle class? So much about even our Social Security, infrastructure hard stop. So how we think about improvements in roads and tolls, and so everything is like, so the middle class doing good? Okay, yes, we can get a road. The middle class doing good? Okay, yes, you guys can retire. Middle class, so there's just so much that's dependent upon the stability of that middle class that far surpasses work. It's about the individual sustenance and our country's footing. What's that? Lively? Yeah. Okay, Pepper, you get.
Deep into this, but it just makes me think and wonder about, does the diversity, equity, and inclusion department influence public policy or legislation? Because some legislation is going to keep, the way it's going now, it's keeping the middle class down for Black and brown people. So we keep talking about how's the middle class doing? So have you seen that in your company? I mean, you're not supposed to get into that area, but have you seen any kind of dribblings about that? And I don't mean to take them in different directions, but I am really wondering why, because I think that's a really important topic about the changing dynamics, and the growth of the middle class is important, but what we're seeing is we're kind of going backwards.
Yeah, we actually have had that conversation, and our CEO and chairman has been very introspective about what is his voice used for, given that it's attached to our brand, and how far can he go based on his own sort of belief system of what's right and wrong in solving all of the social ills of the country, as opposed to what does it mean for business if we don't have a middle class. And I think there's a group of corporate executives that sit in DC. They're called the Business Roundtable. Our company is very active there. I'm active as part of, certain initiatives. CEOs are influencing Washington around, these issues, et cetera. But I think it's a really good question, because there's a line around sort of, you run a company that you have responsibility to shareholders, and how far can you push your brand into the conversation?
If we're talking specifically about social and political issues, what I'm finding is our employees are not allowing us to be silent. So, and also employees won't join your company or candidates won't join your company if they think that you stand for nothing. That's just, those days are over, and that broke probably over the past 2 years or so. So we are still trying to find a way to navigate that in a way that's responsible to our shareholders, responsible to our customers, and responsible to our employees, but not taking a position is no longer an option. We'll get, don't want to be Disney in Florida, just saying. Just saying, but we do have to figure it out, and that's another reason I love my job, because it is never a dull moment. So yeah, we do have to figure it out together.
Yeah, really, I mean, exceptional points. I think part of what we're also challenged by is that we allow pop culture and folklore to frame issues for us. I know even with the Fed, we talked about, oh, that's political, but and it's not even really social. It's economics, all of it, women's rights. I mean, it's all about the economics at this point. I mean, maybe there was a point, and I think sometimes if we push against that and just really encourage our leaders to articulate from their pulpit, which are very powerful pulpits, a point of view about how the American economy is unfolding. They have every right to do that with their brand in tow.
Level that you had, I can speak, they can speak on the business, and how that I think is a safe way to enter this conversation and to support it.
Any other questions? I have no idea where we are with time. I think doesn't even matter. Oh, okay. Any questions, comments, final thoughts? It was. How about a hand for our panelists? Thank you so much.
Let's give another round of applause for that amazing panel. After that, I never want to see another all-male panel ever again in my life. Ever. Jesus. They're just so much better than we are. Jeez. But that was awesome. And we're pleased that all three of those leaders are on our advisory board for Diverse by Design. So thank you. So now I just want to bring up our good friends at Cara, Leanna Brand, so that she can share more about Cara and their mission with us. And then we'll close out with our president and CEO.
Thank you so much. And first and foremost, I have to begin by saying, welcome to our house. Welcome to Cara Collective. We are so pleased to have you here for such an incredibly important conversation. So before I go anywhere, because I'm so energized from this conversation, I could not forgive myself if I didn't just say thank you and let you all know that I'm full of gratitude for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. So if you'll allow me, I just have a couple of slides. I want to just share, if you'll allow me, a little bit more about how we're thinking about some of these opportunities here at Cara Collective, as a way not only just to keep the conversation going, potentially spark some ideas, but also introduce you to the ways in which an organization like Cara can not only be an incredible source of talent, but also a thought partner as you're continuing to grapple with, interrogate some of these really critical practices and experiences that you are all creating across your organizations. So Cara Plus, I'm representing Cara Plus. We're an organization within Cara Collective, really focused on how we can further expand our impact. And I am so pleased and honored to be the Director of Expansion Strategy, really focused on our work with employers. So we can continue. I'm leaving you all in suspense. So first and foremost, we talked a lot about how we can tap into new talent pools today. That was the focus of one of our last conversations. So I want to test this group's knowledge around some of the most critical barriers that we see our participants encounter along this journey. So number one, I'm going to ask the audience, how much more likely are Black adults to be incarcerated compared to white adults? And I'm going to ask you to use your fingers. Since we're not in a virtual room, we can't use the chat. Throw those fingers up if you think it is 2.4 times, 1, 3.1 times, 5.9 times, or 6.8 times. So go ahead and throw those fingers up in the air. Yeah, you guys know your stuff. So if you'll click through, we'll see it's 5.9 times more likely. And then secondly, when employers require a 4-year degree, they exclude right off the top 68% of Black and what percent of Latinx talent? So again, throw those fingers up in the air, 45%, 54%, 68, or 79%. Okay, this one's interesting. So go ahead and click through. So 79%, right? So we're talking about growing our talent pipeline. And in some ways that can be contradictory to the goal of how we think about talent acquisition, because if you look at the total talent pool, your job is to zoom into the right talent that is going to meet your needs, fill the requirements and responsibilities of your jobs. That is your duty to your organization. But what we're seeing here in the conversation we've had today is that you are immediately excluding these talent pools that, as we heard from Mr. Jesse, cannot and should not be judged upon mistakes in their life, or the fact that they have not always had the opportunity to advance their skills in the same way that others have. So we understand where some of these barriers are coming from, but if you are thinking about things like background checks, or you're looking at that bachelor's degree requirement, you are automatically excluding a huge portion of the talent pool that, as we know, have incredible skills and potential to contribute to your organizations. And we can keep going. So what's the alternative here? We talked about this in that alternative skills conversation, which is that skills is actually 5 times more predictive of job performance than if you look at education. It's also 2.5 times more predictive of job performance than if you even look at work experience. So skills really is that window into how can we have a different paradigm for understanding how individuals are going to bring their potential and skills to the role so that they can fulfill the needs of your organizations. But we also know this is not easy. So what can we do about this? How do we change our processes and the systems that we've been relying on for so long? So number one, where can you even find this incredible talent? So we invite you to think about organizations like Perscolis and Kara as a natural partner in identifying and tapping into these new talent pools. Just to give you a quick snapshot of our organization and the kinds of partners we are working with, we have been very blessed to work with 70 plus employment partners over our 30-year history that have been working with us and understand the potential of these talent pools. But we also serve some of the most vulnerable individuals that have encountered significant barriers to returning to work. So what that looks like for us is about 50% of our participant population has been impacted by the criminal justice system. And if you remember that very first slide, that means that many of them are just off the top, removed from the hiring process, are not even considered for that opportunity. We also look at demographics. So we've talked a lot about Black and Brown talent. So 90% of our talent pool is representing those communities. And then going back to how we think about educational background and educational requirements, up to 1/3 of our participant population does not have a high school diploma. So already thinking about how those barriers are impacting people's ability to access opportunity. So we can keep moving. So when you think about an organization like Kara, kind of the number one way usually employers work with us is by connecting, making these one-to-one connections between a specific opening or opportunity and our talent pool. But the second piece that I'm really inviting you all to consider in kind of where our organization is going is where we can leverage all the collective learnings, what we have as practitioners seen about the lived experiences and how that impacts people's journey through the hiring and employment process. We're taking those insights and sharing those with our peers, as well as companies like the ones represented in this room, to really interrogate and think about their processes and the kind of experiences and outcomes they are creating for job seekers. And what that translates to is a philosophy that we like to call just inclusive employment. And we have a lot of words that we've talked about today: equity, equality, inclusion, diversity, all of these things. But for us, what that means is all the efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion that are specifically focusing on Black and Brown people are incredibly important, period. And in this moment, when we as a society, we as an economy are thinking about how we can tap into new talent pools, we want to make sure you're thinking about things like racial equity and all of the different experiences that have prevented people from accessing opportunities. So that could be involvement with the criminal justice system, among many other things we've talked about today. So really our hope is in this moment, it's about tapping into all those different talent pools that have been historically locked out of opportunity. And for us, I think the people in this room, this is not going to be a new idea, but what our hope is that we just strategically look at the different moments in the employee life cycle as different levers that a company can pull to become more inclusive employers. So that starts with sourcing. We've heard about the different ways you can look and find talent. But then you think about something that we see so often is how are companies crafting opportunities in a way that job seekers can actually see themselves, that they can say, I see myself in these requirements, that the experiences and educational requirements being asked on a job description are something that I recognize in myself. And oftentimes with a company may have the best of intentions and may be open to talent pools that don't have those requirements, but if they haven't examined those job postings, if they haven't examined how they're communicating opportunities, that oftentimes they are just totally missing out on individuals because they do not see themselves in those opportunities. So it starts with that sourcing and kind of the ways in which you're communicating opportunity communities. Hiring, we think a lot about in terms of people's journey through the application, interview process, and their ability to successfully make it through. And we can go on and on. I really appreciated the conversations we heard about the roles of setting up even managers so that they can better support new people coming into the workplace. I love that analogy of the garden, and who are those gardeners, the groundskeepers who may not have had that initial choice of, yes, we as a company are committing to diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of times they're not brought into those conversations, and yet they are some of the most critical stakeholders to making it happen. So how do we set those people up for success? And then we think about advancement so that people coming in at the entry level don't stay there. Entry level by definition is that pathway into the organization, but I think success for us, as we've heard from many people, is not limiting people to those opportunities. And then this last one, I'll just pause on for a moment. I think it's so critical because it's not just within your company looking at these experiences across the employee life cycle. It really is, how are you sharing that story with other companies? How are you taking a position and recognizing that you have a responsibility and huge ability to influence your peers in the space, not only by what you're doing, but so much of the work we see is not just, hey, we know we need to make change, but change is hard. Can you share what you've been doing? Can you share what's worked and what has not worked so that others can learn from you? Are you willing to do that? So we really see these are some of the keys for us in making some of the transformation that needs to happen every day, like Mr. Jesse reminded us. And then finally, this is just a quick snapshot of what this has looked like for our team. Really, we've tried to distill some of our own practices, what we know to be true about what impacts job seekers early on in their journey as they're going through the hiring process, as well as what's so important for them to be able to stick, stay, and succeed in your organization. So we have our Inclusion Action Lab, which is a platform where we have these kinds of conversations. But at the end of the day, if you take away anything, it's that I hope you continue these conversations with organizations like Kara, with organizations like Perscolis. Be part of these conversations with people that are like-minded and are excited to have these conversations, as well as with those that are earlier in their journey. Maybe they've never heard of skills-based hiring. So my hope is that you'll find ways to engage with organizations and partners, because as we all know, this work can't happen in isolation. We need to partner and not only with one another, but really think about all the people that are being impacted and how their voice can be lifted along the way. So thank you so much. Liana Brown, again, please connect with me. We are excited to have you here again and looking forward to ways we can collaborate.
All right, guys, we're about to wrap up. I know you're tired, and we're about to wrap up. So thank you all for your time today. You know, I will say that today has created a space for me to be even more grateful to be working at the organization that I work with, which is Perscolis, and to be up under a leader that not only employs me and hundreds of other talented and bright individuals across the country, but I've been with the company for 22 years for a reason. It's because my leader sees me, understands me, and he never made me feel like I had to disown or hide my own personal narrative. He never made me feel like I had to be in a box in any way. He's given me multiple opportunities to live a life that I'm living now and to be a C-suite executive. And I'm sharing all that to say that I believe that those traits are way more important than his title, and I want to bring him up to close us out. So I want to introduce to many of you our president and CEO, the leader of Perscolis, Mr. Plinio Ayala.
Thank you, Danny. Well, I'm thrilled to be here in this beautiful city, in this space of an organization that I respect immensely in Kara. So thank you so much for hosting us. To the members of the Diverse by Design board, Franklin, thank you for your leadership. Tina, Maria, and Julie just left. Thank you so much for being partners in this movement. I also wanted to be, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my teammates. Damien, Lauren, Andy, thank you for your leadership. Erica, thank you. Did I miss anybody? Brad, thank you for being there always for me and for the people that we serve. And finally, you know, our partner in tech systems. You guys are truly an example of how together we can make a difference. You are living it every day. I am proud to say that they've hired 1,000 people from our program. That is amazing. And most recently, and this is an incredible stat as well, most recently we had a partnership with tech and another company. 126 people graduated and they hired 120 of them. So that is just amazing. So they're living the work. Let me close with this. And you heard some of this before, and duh, Nikki, thank you for everything that you've done today, all your words of wisdom. Thank you. So last week, my wife and I went to Kansas to visit my oldest son, and we had an opportunity to take him out to dinner. And Jason says, "Dad, why do you keep doing this work?" I was talking about I need to fly to Orlando and St. Louis. And I said to him, "Yeah, I do it for the learners, of course. I do it for my teammates at Perscolis. I do it for the employers that we work with." Then I said to him, "I do it for my grandchild that you're gonna have, right?" And he goes, what are you talking about, Dad? You heard about it today. The economic vibrancy of this country is at stake. The future of my grandchildren, the future of our grandchildren is at stake. That's why I do this work. That's why I will continue to do this work, and I'm proud to do it alongside amazing people like all of you in this audience. And so on behalf of Perscolis, our board, the people that we serve, the employers that we work with, thank you for being part of this incredibly important movement, because at the end of the day, the future of our nation is at stake. And we can't get to where we want to get to without all of your help. So thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Safe travels to wherever you end up. And again, on behalf of Perscolis, we're grateful that you were here this afternoon. Thank you.